The ticking of 1,000 clocks had become Simon Ashford's only companion in the 3 years since he had moved to this remote village at the edge of the forest. Yet tonight something altogether different had joined the symphony of gears and springs that filled his workshop. Simon set down the delicate escapement wheel he had been adjusting and cocked his head to one side, listening. There it was again, a soft shuffling sound from above, like feet moving across the slate tiles of his roof. He frowned and wiped the magnifying lens from his eye, blinking away the strain of close work. It was past midnight, far too late for any reasonable person to be climbing about on rooftops, and the village had no children mischievous enough to dare such antics at this hour. The sound continued, a gentle padding that suggested someone was settling into place rather than attempting stealth. Simon's curiosity overcame his caution. He extinguished the oil lamps in his workshop one by one, leaving only a single candle to light his way through the narrow stairs that led to the upper floor of his cottage. The building was tall and thin, built by some eccentric previous owner who had wanted a clear view of the valley below. Simon had purchased it precisely because the isolation suited his work, though he had not anticipated needing to investigate nocturnal roof visitors. He pushed open the window of his bedroom and leaned out into the cool spring night. The stars were brilliant overhead, scattered like diamonds across black velvet, and the moon was a thin crescent that provided barely enough light to see by. Simon gripped the windowsill and carefully pulled himself up and out, his boots finding purchase on the rough stone wall. He was not a young man anymore, having seen 40 winters, but his work with tiny clock mechanisms had kept his hands steady, and his body lean if not particularly strong. The roof sloped gently enough that he could make his way up to the peak without too much difficulty. As his eyes crested the ridgeline, he froze. There, sitting with her back to him, was a figure unlike any he had expected. Even in the dim moonlight, he could see the distinctive green tone of her skin, the broad set of her shoulders, and the pointed tips of her ears that poked through long, dark hair bound in a simple braid. An orc. On his roof. Simon's heart hammered in his chest, but he forced himself to remain still and observe. The orc girl, for she seemed young despite her height and build, was not doing anything threatening. She sat with her knees drawn up, her arms wrapped around them, and her face tilted up toward the sky. She was counting, her voice so soft that Simon had to strain to hear it. 347, 348, 349. Her voice held a gentle quality that seemed at odds with everything Simon had ever heard about orcs. The stories told of brutal warriors, savage raiders who swept down from the northern mountains to pillage and destroy. This girl sounded almost peaceful. Simon remained frozen in indecision for several long moments. He could climb back down and pretend he had seen nothing, or he could announce his presence. The latter option seemed foolish, possibly dangerous, but something in the lonely quality of her counting made his chest tighten with unexpected sympathy. "You have been coming here every night," Simon said quietly, making it a statement rather than a question. The orc girl jerked around so quickly that she nearly lost her balance on the roof. Her eyes were wide and amber-colored, catching what little light there was and reflecting it back like a cat's. Small tusks protruded from her lower jaw, giving her an exotic appearance rather than a frightening one. She stared at Simon with obvious alarm, her hands braced against the slate tiles as though preparing to flee or fight. "I did not mean to trespass," she said quickly, her voice rough with panic. "I will leave. I will not return." "Wait," Simon said, holding up one hand in what he hoped was a calming gesture. "I am not angry, I am simply curious. Why my roof? Why every night, The orc girl hesitated, clearly torn between the instinct to run and something else that kept her rooted in place. After a long moment, she seemed to deflate slightly, her shoulders sagging. "This is the highest point in the village," she said softly. "From here I can see the most stars. I have been counting them." "Counting them?" Simon echoed, surprised by the answer. "Whatever for?" "Because I want to know how many there are," she replied, as though it were the most obvious thing in the world. "I have been trying for 2 months, but I always lose count before dawn comes. The most I have reached is 873. Despite the strangeness of the situation, Simon felt a smile tugging at his lips. "I suspect there are more stars than anyone could count in a single night," he said gently. "Perhaps more than exist in all the numbers we know." The orc girl looked back up at the sky, her expression wistful. "I thought so too, but I wanted to try anyway." Simon considered his options. The sensible thing would be to tell her to leave and not come back. If anyone in the village discovered an orc had been sneaking about at night, there would be panic and likely violence. Orcs and humans did not mix, and the prejudice ran deep on both sides. Wars had been fought within living memory, and many in the village had lost family members to orcish raids. But Simon had always been more interested in mechanisms than politics, in the precise and logical world of gears and springs, rather than the messy complications of human prejudice. And there was something deeply lonely about this girl sitting on his roof, trying to count the infinite stars. "You may continue to come here," Simon heard himself say, surprising himself with the words. "But please try to be quiet. I do precision work and I need my sleep." The orc girl's eyes went wide again, but this time with surprise rather than fear. "You would allow this, even though I am an orc?" "I care more about having my sleep disturbed than I do about the color of your skin," Simon said, which was not entirely true but seemed like the right thing to say. "What is your name?" She hesitated again, and Simon could see the war playing out across her expressive face. Finally, she said, "Kara. My name is Kara." "I am Simon," he replied with a slight nod. "Welcome to my roof, Kara, though I do hope you will be careful. It would be quite inconvenient if you fell through and damaged my workshop." The ghost of a smile crossed Kara's face, and Simon was struck by how it transformed her features. "I will be careful," she promised. Simon nodded once more and then carefully made his way back down to his window. As he settled into bed, he could hear the soft sound of Kara's voice resuming her count above him. 350, 351, 352. He fell asleep to the sound of her counting, and when he woke the next morning, she was gone. The roof was empty, showing no sign that anyone had been there at all. Simon might have convinced himself it had been a dream if not for the faint scuff marks on the slate tiles visible from his window. The day passed in its usual rhythm of careful work. Simon was in the middle of constructing a new clock for the mayor's office, a complex piece that required every bit of his skill and concentration. He had apprenticed with a master clockmaker in the capital city in his youth, learning the delicate art of creating timepieces that could measure hours and minutes with perfect accuracy. When he had tired of the noise and crowds of the city, he had come to this small village where his skills were valued and his solitude respected. As evening fell, Simon found himself growing distracted, listening for sounds from above. He told himself it was merely curiosity, nothing more, but he could not quite make himself believe it. There was something compelling about the idea of someone so determined to count the uncountable, someone who would risk discovery and danger just to sit beneath the stars. The first sounds came shortly after midnight. Simon heard the soft thump of someone landing on his roof, followed by the familiar padding of feet moving toward the peak. He smiled despite himself and returned his attention to the tiny spring he was installing in the clock mechanism before him. This pattern continued for a week. Each night, Kara would arrive after midnight and settle into her counting. Each morning, she would be gone before dawn. Simon never went back up to the roof, respecting the unspoken boundary between them, but he found himself growing accustomed to her presence. The counting became a sort of lullaby, helping him drift off to sleep after long hours of meticulous work. On the 8th night, a spring storm rolled in from the mountains. Rain lashed against the windows of Simon's workshop, and thunder rumbled in the distance like the voice of some angry god. Simon worked by lamplight, confident that Kara would not venture out in such weather. He was therefore surprised when he heard the now familiar sounds from above, muted by the drumming of rain on slate. Simon set down his tools and stared at the ceiling in disbelief. Surely she was not actually sitting on his roof in this downpour. The thought was absurd, and yet the sounds were unmistakable. He sighed and made his way upstairs, grabbing a heavy woolen cloak from its hook by the door. When he climbed out onto the roof this time, he found Kara exactly where she had been before, sitting with her knees drawn up and her face turned to the sky. She was soaked through, her clothing plastered to her body, and her braid hanging like a wet rope down her back. Rain streamed down her face, but she seemed oblivious to it, still counting in that same soft voice. 412, 413, 414. Kara, Simon called out, having to raise his voice to be heard over the rain. You cannot possibly see the stars through these clouds. She turned to look at him, and even in the darkness Simon could see the sadness in her eyes. I know, she said simply. But if I do not come, then I have given up, and I do not want to give up. Simon felt something twist in his chest at those words. He understood stubbornness, had felt its pull in his own life, but this seemed beyond mere determination. This seemed like desperation. Come down, he said, gesturing toward his window. You will catch your death up here, and I cannot count on an orc to have the sense to come in from the rain on her own. Kara blinked at him, surprise evident on her face. Come down, into your home. Unless you prefer to sit in a storm all night, yes, Simon said, already starting to shiver despite his cloak. I am going back inside. You may follow or not as you choose. He did not wait for her answer, climbing back down and through his window. He stood there dripping on his bedroom floor, half convinced she would not come. Then he heard a soft scraping sound, and Kara's legs appeared in the window opening. She was considerably larger than Simon, and it took some awkward maneuvering for her to squeeze through, but eventually she stood before him in his small bedroom, looking like a drowned cat. They stared at each other for a long moment. Simon was acutely aware that he had just invited an orc into his home, something that would likely see him driven from the village if anyone discovered it. Kara looked equally uncertain, her amber eyes darting around the room as though expecting a trap. Wait here, Simon said finally, breaking the silence. He left the bedroom and returned a moment later with several rough towels. Dry yourself. I will make tea. He left her again before she could respond, making his way down to his workshop and the small kitchen area tucked into one corner. His hands shook slightly as he filled the kettle and set it on the stove, and he was not entirely sure whether it was from cold or nerves. What was he doing? This was madness. And yet, the memory of Kara sitting in the rain, stubbornly counting stars she could not see, had moved him in a way he did not fully understand. When he returned upstairs with 2 steaming mugs of tea, he found Kara still standing exactly where he had left her, though she had at least made some attempt to dry her hair and clothing. She accepted the mug he offered with obvious surprise, holding it carefully as though it might break. "Thank you," she said softly. "I do not understand why you are being kind to me." Simon settled into the single chair in his bedroom, leaving Kara to sit on the edge of his bed if she chose. "Perhaps I am simply curious," he said. "It is not every day one finds an orc counting stars on one's roof." Kara's tusked mouth quirked in what might have been a smile. It is not every day an orc finds a human who does not immediately try to kill her. The blunt words hung in the air between them. Simon sipped his tea and considered how to respond. "I have no particular love for violence," he said eventually. "My work requires patience and precision, not bloodshed, and you have done nothing to threaten me." "Others would not see it that way," Kara said quietly. "To them, my very existence is a threat." "Perhaps," Simon acknowledged. "But I prefer to judge based on actions rather than assumptions. You have been coming to my roof for weeks, and the worst you have done is keep me awake with your counting." This time, Kara definitely smiled, and Simon found himself smiling back. They drank their tea in companionable silence, listening to the storm rage outside. Eventually, Kara set her empty mug aside and said, "I should go before it gets light." "Will you return tomorrow?" Simon asked, surprising himself with the question. Kara looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "Do you want me to?" Simon considered the question seriously. Allowing this to continue was dangerous and foolish. But he had been alone for so long, surrounded only by his clocks and their endless ticking. The idea of having even this strange, limited companionship appealed to him more than he wanted to admit. "Yes," he said simply. Kara nodded once, her eyes reflecting something Simon could not quite name. Then she moved to the window and squeezed back through, disappearing into the rainy darkness. Simon stood there for a long time after she had gone, wondering what he had just set in motion. The next night was clear, and Kara returned to count her stars. The night after that, Simon found himself climbing up to sit beside her, bringing a blanket and 2 mugs of warm cider. Kara accepted both with that same surprised gratitude, and they sat together in silence while she counted. "Why stars?" Simon asked eventually, when her count had reached 543. "Of all the things you could be doing with your nights, why this?" Kara was quiet for so long that Simon thought she might not answer. Then she said, "When I was small, my mother told me that every star was the soul of someone who had died. She said they watched over us from the sky, keeping us safe. When she died in a raid 3 years ago, I started counting. I wanted to know which one was her." Simon felt his throat tighten. "I am sorry for your loss. The raid was started by humans," Kara continued, her voice carefully neutral. "They came to our settlement claiming we had stolen livestock. We had not, but they did not care to hear our denials. My mother died defending our home. My father survived, but something in him died that day too. He became hard and bitter, filled with hate for all humans. When he learned I was sneaking away at night to come to this village, he cast me out. He said I was a traitor to our people." "Where do you live now?" Simon asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. "In the forest. There is an old hunter's shelter about 2 miles from here. It keeps the rain off, mostly." Simon felt a surge of indignation on her behalf. "That is no way to live." Kara shrugged, the gesture conveying a world of resignation. "It is better than staying where I am not wanted. At least in the forest I can count my stars in peace." They sat together until the eastern sky began to pale with the approach of dawn. Kara's count had reached nearly 900 before she reluctantly stopped and prepared to leave. As she moved toward the edge of the roof, Simon found himself saying, "You do not have to sleep in a broken shelter. My workshop has a storage room with a proper door and a window. It is not much, but it is dry and warm." Kara froze, turning to stare at him with wide eyes. "You would let me stay? In your home?" Not in the main part, Simon clarified quickly, feeling the need to set boundaries even as he made the offer. But the storage room is separate, accessed from the outside. No one would know you were there. You could sleep during the day and come out at night when you wish to count your stars. Why would you do this? Kara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. You owe me nothing. You do not even know me. Simon considered the question carefully. Why was he doing this? He could tell himself it was simple compassion, the same impulse that might lead him to help any creature in need, but he knew there was more to it than that. In the short time he had known Kara, she had intrigued him in a way nothing else had in years. Her determination, her unexpected gentleness, the lonely sadness that seemed to cling to her like a cloak, all of it called to something deep inside him. Perhaps I am tired of being alone, Simon said finally, speaking the truth he had not quite admitted to himself. My clocks are excellent companions, but they do not count stars or drink tea, and I suspect you are tired of being alone too. Kara's eyes shimmered with something that might have been tears, though she blinked rapidly and they did not fall. I will accept your offer, she said quietly, but only if you allow me to help you somehow. I will not be a burden. Can you cook? Simon asked, thinking of the uninspired meals he typically prepared for himself. Yes, Kara said. My mother taught me before she died. Then you may cook and we will call it even, Simon said. Come, I will show you the room. He led her down from the roof and around to the side of his cottage, where a small door opened into what had once been a storage room for wood and supplies. Simon had cleared most of it out years ago, and now it held only a few boxes of clock parts and tools. There was a narrow window that let in light, and the space was large enough for a bed and a small table. I will bring you blankets and a mattress, Simon said. It is not luxurious, but it should serve. Kara stepped into the small room and turned in a slow circle, taking it in. It is more than I had hoped for, she said softly. Thank you, Simon. The way she said his name with such genuine gratitude made Simon's chest tighten again. He nodded brusquely and said, Get some rest. I will check on you this evening. He left her there and returned to his workshop, but found it impossible to concentrate on his work. His mind kept returning to the green-skinned girl in his storage room, to the story of her loss and exile, to the determined way she counted stars night after night. He was a man who valued order and predictability, who had built his life around the precise mechanisms of clockwork. Kara was chaos personified, unpredictable and dangerous, and entirely outside his carefully controlled existence. And yet, he could not bring himself to regret inviting her to stay. That evening, Simon knocked softly on the storage room door before opening it. Kara was awake, sitting on the mattress he had brought her earlier, looking more rested than he had yet seen her. She had changed out of her wet clothes into something dry, and her dark hair was loose around her shoulders. I was thinking, Simon said without preamble, that if you are going to count stars properly, you need a system. Trying to count them all at once is inefficient. You lose your place too easily. Kara tilted her head, interested. What do you suggest? Divide the sky into sections, Simon said, warming to the topic. Count one section completely over multiple nights until you are confident in your number, then move to the next section. Eventually, you will have counted the entire visible sky. Kara's face lit up with understanding and excitement. That is brilliant. Why did I not think of that? Because you are not a clockmaker, Simon said with a small smile. We are trained to break complex problems into manageable pieces. It is the only way to build something as intricate as a timepiece. Will you help me? Kara asked. Will you help me divide the sky and keep track of my counts? Simon had not intended to become quite so involved, but he found himself nodding anyway. Yes, we can start tonight. They spent the evening in Simon's workshop, where he drew a map of the night sky based on his own observations over the years. He divided it into 12 sections, like hours on a clock face, and showed Kara how to use fixed landmarks to keep her orientation. Kara watched with rapt attention, asking intelligent questions and making suggestions of her own. As they worked together, Simon found himself genuinely enjoying her company. She had a quick mind and a willingness to learn that reminded him of his own apprentice days. More than that, she had a sense of humor that emerged as she grew more comfortable, making dry observations that caught him off guard and made him laugh. When full darkness fell, they climbed to the roof together, and Kara began counting the first section of sky. Simon sat beside her, keeping notes in a small journal by the light of a hooded lantern. The work was painstaking, requiring Kara to carefully track each star she counted to avoid duplication or omission. But she approached it with unwavering focus, and by the time dawn approached, they had completed a full count of the first section. 217 stars, Simon announced, writing the number in his journal with a flourish. Kara smiled, her tusks catching the first light of dawn. 217 souls watching over us, only 11 sections left to count. This became their routine. During the day, Simon worked on his clocks while Kara slept in the storage room. In the evening, they would have dinner together, Kara proving to be as good a cook as she had claimed. Then they would climb to the roof and continue their great project of counting the stars. The first section had taken them 3 nights to count and recount until they were confident in their number. The second section took 4 nights, as it contained more stars and required greater care. Simon found himself looking forward to these nights with an anticipation he had not felt in years. The companionship, the shared purpose, the strange intimacy of sitting side by side in the darkness, all of it combined to create something precious. As spring turned to summer, Simon realized he had been happier in these past months than he had been in all his years of solitude. Kara had become more than just a temporary guest. She had become his friend, and perhaps something more that he was not quite ready to name. Kara seemed to feel similarly. She smiled more readily now, and her laughter came easier. She told him stories of her childhood, of the Orc settlement where she had grown up and the traditions of her people. In turn, Simon told her about his apprenticeship in the capital, about the master clockmaker who had taught him his trade, about the woman he had almost married before she had decided she wanted more excitement than a quiet clockmaker could provide. She was a fool, Kara said bluntly when he finished that particular story. Any woman would be lucky to have you. Simon felt heat rise to his cheeks, grateful for the darkness that hid his blush. That is kind of you to say. It is not kindness, it is truth, Kara insisted. You are clever and patient and generous. You took in a stranger who had every reason to be your enemy. You gave me a home when I had none. These are not small things, Simon. Simon did not know how to respond to such earnest praise. He deflected by saying, "Yes, well, you have proven yourself worth the risk. Your stew alone justifies the arrangement." Kara laughed, the sound warm in the night air. "Is that all I am to you?" "A cook." The question was asked lightly, but Simon heard the genuine curiosity beneath it. He turned to look at her, really look at her, seeing past the green skin and tusks to the person beneath. In the starlight, she was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with conventional human standards. She was strong and real and wonderfully, stubbornly alive. "No," Simon said quietly. "You are considerably more than that." Something shifted in the air between them, a recognition of feelings that had been growing unacknowledged for months. Kara held his gaze, her amber eyes reflecting starlight, and Simon felt his breath catch in his chest. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other, the rest of the world falling away. Then Kara said softly, "We should finish counting this section. Dawn will come soon." Simon nodded, breaking eye contact with an effort. "Yes, of course." They returned to their counting, but something had changed. Simon was acutely aware of Kara's presence beside him in a way he had not been before, of the warmth of her body and the sound of her breathing. When their hands accidentally brushed as Simon passed her the journal, he felt a jolt like touching a live wire. This was dangerous territory. He was a human, and she was an orc, and such relationships were not simply frowned upon but actively forbidden. If the village discovered Kara was living in his home, there would be violence. If her people discovered she was consorting with a human, there might be worse. The sensible thing would be to maintain their current arrangement, to keep things platonic and safe. But Simon was discovering that his heart cared little for sense or safety. Over the following weeks, the tension between them grew. Small moments took on greater significance. When Kara would hand him a cup of tea, their fingers would linger together for just a moment too long. When they sat on the roof to count stars, they sat closer than was strictly necessary. Simon caught himself watching Kara when she was not looking, admiring the strength in her shoulders, the curve of her smile, the intensity in her eyes when she concentrated on her counting. He suspected Kara was doing the same, though neither of them spoke of it directly. It was as though they had reached an unspoken agreement to let whatever was growing between them develop at its own pace, without forcing it into words that might shatter the delicate thing they were building. They were nearing completion of their 7th section when everything changed. Simon had gone into the village to deliver a repaired clock to a farmer who lived on the far edge of town. It was a rare, sunny afternoon, and the journey took longer than expected when the farmer's wife insisted he stay for lunch. By the time Simon returned to his cottage, the sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon. He heard the shouting before he saw anything amiss. Male voices, raised in anger and excitement, coming from behind his cottage. Simon's blood went cold. He dropped the empty basket he had been carrying and ran toward the sound, rounding the corner to find a scene from his worst nightmares. 3 men from the village had Kara cornered against the side of his cottage. She stood with her back pressed to the wall, her hands raised in a placating gesture, her face a mask of controlled fear. The men held farming implements that could easily serve as weapons: a pitchfork, a hoe, a heavy wooden staff. "Please," Kara was saying, her voice steady despite the fear Simon could see in her eyes. "I mean no harm. I was just—" "Shut your mouth, orc," snarled the man with the pitchfork. Simon recognized him as Garrett, a farmer with a reputation for meanness and a hatred of orcs born from losing his brother in the last war. "What are you doing here? Planning to steal, to murder us in our beds?" "I am doing nothing of the sort," Kara said, still trying to reason with them. "I am simply passing through." "Passing through behind the clockmaker's house," said another man, his tone skeptical. "That is a strange path to take." "What is going on here?" Simon demanded, pushing his way between the men and Kara. His heart was hammering so hard he thought it might burst from his chest, but he kept his voice level and authoritative. Garrett turned to him, his expression a mix of concern and suspicion. "We found this orc skulking around your property, Simon. We thought she might be planning something." "You know how they are." "I know how you are assuming things without evidence," Simon said sharply. "This woman was not skulking. She was likely just cutting through to reach the forest road." "You know this creature?" asked the third man, his eyes narrowing. Simon's mind raced. He could deny knowing Kara, could let her leave and hope she found safety elsewhere. But that would mean losing her, and the thought was surprisingly painful. The alternative was to admit the truth and face the consequences. He chose honesty. "I know her," Simon said firmly. "Her name is Kara, and she has been staying in my storage room for the past several months. She has done no harm to anyone." The silence that followed his declaration was deafening. All three men stared at him as though he had grown a second head. Then Garrett's face contorted with rage. "You have been harboring an orc," he spat. "Have you lost your mind, Simon?" "She needed help, and I provided it," Simon said, moving to stand more fully in front of Kara. "That is not a crime." "It is a betrayal," Garrett snarled. "How do we know she has not been spying on us?" "Learning our defenses. She could be planning an attack right now." "Do not be ridiculous," Simon said. "Kara is alone. She poses no threat to anyone." "How can you be so sure?" demanded the second man. "Orcs are treacherous by nature. Everyone knows that." "I am sure because I have spent months getting to know her," Simon said, his patience wearing thin. "She is kind and peaceful and has never shown an ounce of aggression. Your prejudice blinds you to the truth." "Our prejudice?" Garrett's voice rose to a shout. "You dare speak to us of prejudice when you have been sleeping with that green-skinned monster?" "I have not," Simon started, then stopped, realizing the futility of arguing specifics. "What I do in my own home is my business. Not when it endangers the village," Garrett said. He leveled his pitchfork at Kara, his knuckles white where he gripped the handle. "She has to go. Now. And if we ever see her near this village again, we will kill her on sight." "You will do no such thing," Simon said, his voice dropping to a dangerous level. "Kara is under my protection." "Then you are as much a traitor as she is a monster," Garrett said. "The council will hear of this, Simon. You will answer for your actions." The three men backed away, still keeping their weapons trained on Kara until they were out of range. Then they turned and hurried back toward the village center, no doubt eager to spread the news of what they had discovered. Simon watched them go, his mind already racing through possibilities and consequences. When they were finally alone, he turned to Kara and found her trembling, her earlier composure cracking. "I am sorry," she whispered. "This is my fault. I should have been more careful." "This is not your fault," Simon said firmly. He wanted to reach out to her to offer physical comfort, but he was not sure if she would welcome it. "Those men were looking for an excuse to hate. You gave them nothing but your existence." "What will happen now?" Kara asked, her voice small in a way he had never heard before. Simon took a deep breath. "Honestly, nothing good. The village council will likely demand that I send you away. They may levy fines or other punishments. In the worst case, they may try to force me to leave the village entirely." "Then I will go now before it comes to that," Kara said, already starting to move toward the forest. "You have been so kind to me, Simon. I will not let you lose everything because of me." "Wait," Simon said, catching her arm. The contact sent a jolt through him, but he did not let go. "You do not have to run, not yet. Let me think." Kara looked down at his hand on her arm, then up at his face. "What is there to think about? They will destroy you if I stay." "Perhaps," Simon acknowledged, "but I am not ready to give up yet, and I am not ready to let you go." The words hung between them, weighted with meaning beyond the immediate situation. Kara's eyes searched his face, looking for something. "Why?" she asked softly. "Why would you risk so much for me?" Simon could have deflected again, could have hidden behind noble excuses about justice and compassion. But standing there with his hand on her arm, facing the very real possibility of losing her, he found he no longer wanted to hide. "Because I have feelings for you," he said simply. "Feelings that go beyond friendship or simple kindness. I have tried to ignore them, tried to tell myself they are impossible or foolish, but I cannot deny them any longer. When I saw those men threatening you, I felt such terror that I could barely breathe." The thought of you leaving, of never seeing you again, is unbearable. Kara's eyes widened, and for a moment she simply stared at him in silence. Then, slowly, she reached up and covered his hand with her own. "I have feelings for you too," she whispered. "I have had them for weeks, perhaps longer. But I thought it was hopeless. You are human and I am orc. Our peoples hate each other." "Our peoples are fools," Simon said fiercely. "They let old grudges and fear control their hearts, but we do not have to be like them. We can choose differently." "At what cost?" Kara asked, though her hand tightened on his. "How can we be together when the entire world stands against us?" "I do not know," Simon admitted, "but I know I want to try if you want that too." Kara's answer was to step forward and wrap her arms around him, pulling him into an embrace that felt like coming home. Simon held her tightly, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the solid strength of her body against his. They stood there for a long moment, two people from different worlds finding solace in each other. "We should go inside," Simon said eventually. "We need to prepare for whatever comes next." They spent the evening making plans. Simon knew the village council would likely convene within the next day or two to discuss the matter. He would be summoned to defend his actions, and the outcome was far from certain. In the meantime, Kara needed to stay out of sight to avoid further confrontations. As they talked, Simon found himself studying Kara's face with new appreciation. Now that he had acknowledged his feelings, he no longer felt the need to hide his admiration. She was beautiful in a fierce, unconventional way that suited her perfectly. Her strength was not just physical but emotional, a resilience born of loss and hardship that had not broken her spirit. "What are you thinking?" Kara asked, catching him staring. "I am thinking that I am a very fortunate man," Simon said honestly. Kara's smile was tinged with sadness. "You may not feel so fortunate when the village turns against you." "Then I will find a new village," Simon said with a shrug. "Or we will live in the forest. Or we will build a cottage on some remote mountain where no one will bother us. I am a clockmaker. I can work anywhere." "You would give up your home for me?" Kara asked, her voice thick with emotion. "I would give up far more than that," Simon said. He reached across the table and took her hand, marveling at how right it felt. "Kara, I have been alone for so long. Not just physically alone, but alone in every way that matters. You have brought light and warmth and purpose back into my life. I will not let ignorance and hatred take that away." Kara brought his hand to her lips and kissed it gently, a gesture so tender that Simon felt his eyes sting. "Then we will face whatever comes together," she said. That night, instead of climbing to the roof to count stars, they sat together in Simon's workshop and talked about the future. They discussed places they might go if leaving became necessary, how they might make a living in a new location, what challenges they would face as a mixed couple. It was sobering but also strangely exhilarating, planning a life together despite the obstacles. As the hours grew late, Kara reluctantly rose to return to the storage room, but at the door she paused and turned back to Simon. "Will you count with me tonight? Just the two of us on the roof like we used to," Simon smiled. "I thought you would never ask." They climbed to the roof together and settled into their familiar positions, though now Simon sat close enough that their shoulders touched. The night was clear and warm, the stars brilliant overhead. Kara began her count of Section 8, her voice soft and rhythmic in the darkness. Simon found himself paying less attention to the count and more attention to the woman beside him. He studied her profile, the strong line of her jaw, the way starlight caught in her hair. He thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment, from strangers on a roof to something infinitely more precious. "You have stopped writing down the numbers," Kara observed, glancing over at him with amusement. "Sorry," Simon said, not sounding sorry at all. I was distracted by something more interesting than stars. Kara set down the journal and turned to face him fully. Simon, she said softly, may I kiss you? Simon's heart stuttered in his chest. I would like that very much. Kara leaned in slowly, giving him every opportunity to pull away. But Simon met her halfway, and when their lips touched, it felt like the world realigned itself. The kiss was gentle and tentative at first, both of them uncertain, but it deepened as confidence grew. When they finally parted, both were breathless. That was worth waiting for, Kara said, her voice husky. We should have done it weeks ago, Simon replied, already leaning in for another kiss. They stayed on the roof until the eastern sky began to lighten, alternating between counting stars and stealing kisses. By the time they reluctantly climbed down, Simon felt as though he were floating. The village council might come for him tomorrow, the world might try to tear them apart, but tonight they had found something beautiful and true in each other. The summons came the next afternoon. A runner from the village appeared at Simon's door with a formal notice that his presence was required at the council hall that evening to answer questions regarding his harboring of an orc. Simon read the notice calmly, thanked the nervous runner, and spent the remainder of the day preparing his defense. Kara wanted to come with him to face the council together, but Simon refused. They are already angry, he said. Seeing you there will only inflame things further. Trust me to handle this, please. Kara reluctantly agreed, though her worry was evident. Simon kissed her forehead and promised to return as soon as he could. The council hall was packed when Simon arrived. Word of the orc living in their midst had spread quickly, and it seemed half the village had turned out to see what would happen. Simon walked to the front of the room with his head held high, refusing to show fear or shame. The village council consisted of 5 elders, men and women who had lived in the area their entire lives. They sat behind a long table, their faces grave. The head counselor, an elderly woman named Margaret, spoke first. Simon Ashford, you have been summoned to answer questions about your actions. Is it true that you have been harboring an orc in your home? It is true, Simon said clearly, his voice carrying through the hall. Her name is Kara, and she has been staying in my storage room for several months. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Margaret raised her hand for silence before continuing. You understand that this is a serious matter. Orcs are our enemies. They have raided our villages, killed our people. By giving shelter to one, you endanger us all. With respect, counselor, that is not true, Simon said firmly. Kara is not a raider or a warrior. She is a young woman who was cast out by her own people and had nowhere else to go. She has harmed no one and posed no threat. She simply wanted a safe place to sleep. How can you be certain she is no threat? Demanded another counselor, a man named Thomas. Orcs are deceptive. She could have been spying on us, learning our weaknesses. I can be certain because I have spent months getting to know her, Simon replied. I have seen her kindness, her gentleness, her desire for nothing more than peace. She is no more a threat than any person in this room. Garrett stood from where he had been sitting in the crowd. He admits to harboring her. He admits to betraying his own people. What more evidence do we need? I have betrayed no one, Simon said, turning to face Garrett directly. I have shown compassion to someone in need. If that is now considered a crime, then I fear for what we have become. Margaret held up her hand again. Simon, your loyalty to this orc is noted, but you must understand the position you have put us in. If word spreads that we tolerate orcs living among us, we could face attacks from their war bands seeking to exploit perceived weakness. And if word spreads that we show mercy even to our traditional enemies, perhaps it could lead to peace instead of more war, Simon countered. Have we not all lost enough to this endless cycle of violence? When does it stop? It stops when the orcs are driven back to their mountains and stay there, Garrett shouted. Many in the crowd voiced agreement, but Simon also heard some murmurs of dissent. Not everyone was convinced that hatred was the only answer. Margaret looked troubled. Simon, I understand your compassion, truly I do, but the safety of the village must come first. We cannot risk allowing an orc to remain in our midst. Then tell me to leave, Simon said quietly. Because Kara and I are a unit now. Where she goes, I go. I will not abandon her to danger or exile. This declaration caused an uproar. People shouted over each other, some demanding Simon be forced to stay while others called for him to be exiled along with the orc. Margaret had to bang her gavel repeatedly to restore order. Simon, she said when the noise had died down, you are a valued member of this community. Your skills are needed here. Surely you cannot mean to throw all that away for an orc. I do not throw anything away, Simon said. I am choosing to stand by someone I care about. If that means leaving this village, then so be it. But I will not send Kara away to face the world alone. Margaret exchanged glances with the other council members. They huddled together for a whispered conference while the crowd waited in tense silence. Finally, they broke apart and Margaret spoke. The council has reached a decision. Simon Ashford, you are hereby given a choice. Send the orc away immediately and pay a fine of 50 silver pieces for your reckless endangerment of the village. Or leave the village yourself within 3 days, taking the orc with you. The decision is yours. 50 silver pieces was a substantial sum, representing several months of work. It was clearly intended to be punitive, but more than that, it required him to send Kara away, which was unacceptable. I choose to leave, Simon said without hesitation. Another uproar, but Simon ignored it. He turned and walked from the hall with his head high, refusing to show the pain the decision caused him. This village had been his home for 3 years. He had built a life here, established relationships, created beautiful timepieces that would mark the hours for generations. Walking away from it all should have hurt more than it did. But when he returned to his cottage and found Kara waiting anxiously by the door, when she threw her arms around him, and he felt the solid reality of her embrace, Simon knew he had made the right choice. They gave me 3 days to leave, he told her. We need to decide where to go. Kara pulled back to look at his face. Simon, you do not have to do this. Pay the fine. Send me away. I will understand. No, Simon said firmly. I told you on the roof last night, where you go, I go. Now, do you want to spend the next 3 days arguing, or shall we start packing? Kara's smile was brilliant despite the tears streaming down her face. We should pack. They spent the next 2 days preparing for their departure. Simon selected his most essential tools and those pieces of clockwork he could carry. He sold the rest along with most of his furniture, generating a respectable sum that would fund their travels. Kara helped with the packing, her presence a constant comfort despite the chaos. On the second night, as they took a break from packing to eat dinner, Kara asked, "Where should we go? Do you have family elsewhere?" "No family," Simon said. "But I have heard of a town to the south near the coast. It is supposed to be more progressive, less bound by the old prejudices. We might find acceptance there. Or we might find the same hatred in a different location," Kara said quietly. "Perhaps," Simon acknowledged, "but I prefer hope to cynicism, and regardless, we will be together." Kara reached across the table to take his hand. "I love you, Simon." I should have said it before now. I should have said it 100 times already. Simon felt warmth flood through him at the words. "I love you too, Kara, more than I ever thought possible." They finished dinner and returned to packing, but now there was a lightness to the work. They were not just fleeing persecution. They were beginning an adventure together, starting a new life free from the constraints of their old ones. On their final night in the cottage, they climbed to the roof one last time. The sky was clear, and the stars seemed especially bright. Kara settled into her familiar position and began counting the 8th section where they had left off. "You know," Simon said after a while, "we never finished our project. We only counted 8 sections of the sky." "We can finish it wherever we go," Kara said. "The stars will be the same." "Actually, they will not," Simon said. "Different latitudes show different stars. If we go far enough south, we will see constellations that are invisible from here." Kara looked at him with wonder. "Really? There are more stars than the ones we can see from this roof." "Many more," Simon confirmed. "The sky is vast beyond imagining. We could spend a lifetime traveling and counting stars and never see them all." "That sounds perfect," Kara said softly. She abandoned her counting and moved closer to Simon, resting her head on his shoulder. "A lifetime of traveling and counting stars together. I can think of no better way to spend my days." Simon wrapped his arm around her, holding her close. They sat that way for hours, not counting, just existing together beneath the infinite sky. When dawn finally began to break, they reluctantly climbed down for the last time. The cart Simon had purchased was loaded and ready by mid-morning of the 3rd day. Several villagers came to watch them leave, their expressions ranging from hostile to sympathetic. Simon ignored them all, focusing on getting Kara settled on the cart and checking their supplies one final time. As they were about to depart, Margaret approached. The elderly counselor looked troubled, and she gestured for Simon to step aside for a private word. "You are making a mistake," she said quietly. "I know you think this is romantic, that love conquers all, but the world will not be kind to you. You are throwing away everything for a relationship that society will never accept." "Then perhaps society needs to change," Simon replied. "I cannot live my life according to others' fears and prejudices. Kara makes me happy in a way I have never known before. That is worth any cost." Margaret sighed heavily. "I hope you are right, but if you ever find yourself in need, if things become too difficult, you may return here. Not with the orc, but you personally will always have a place in this village." Simon softened slightly. Despite her role in exiling him, Margaret was trying to be kind in her own way. "Thank you, counselor, but I suspect if I return, it will be with Kara at my side or not at all." He climbed onto the cart beside Kara and took up the reins. With a click of his tongue, he urged the horse forward. The cart lurched into motion, carrying them away from the only home Simon had known for years and toward an uncertain future. They traveled south, following roads that grew less familiar with each passing mile. Simon had a rough map purchased from a merchant, but much of their journey would rely on asking directions from those they encountered along the way. They kept largely to themselves, camping away from main roads and avoiding larger settlements where Kara's presence might cause trouble. The first week was difficult. They were still learning how to travel together, how to set up camp efficiently, how to navigate the challenges of life on the road. More than once, Simon questioned whether he had made the right decision. Then he would look at Kara laughing at something or catch her humming while she cooked their dinner, and his doubts would evaporate. They were approximately 2 weeks into their journey when they encountered their first serious problem. They had stopped at a small trading post to purchase supplies, and Simon had left Kara with the cart while he went inside to negotiate. He emerged to find 3 rough-looking men surrounding their cart, making comments that were clearly threatening even if Simon could not hear the exact words from this distance. Simon's blood ran cold. He dropped the sack of grain he had purchased and ran toward the cart, shouting for the men to back away. They turned to face him with grins that held no humor. "This your orc, friend?" asked the largest of the 3, a man with a scarred face and hands that looked accustomed to violence. "She is my companion," Simon said carefully, positioning himself between the men and Kara. "And we want no trouble." "Too late for that," the scarred man said. "Orcs killed my family in the war. I see one now. I see an opportunity for payback." "She had nothing to do with that," Simon said, trying to keep his voice calm. "She is just a person trying to live her life. Please let us pass." "I do not think so," the man said, his hand dropping to the knife at his belt. What happened next occurred so quickly that Simon barely had time to process it. The scarred man lunged forward with his knife drawn. Simon tried to block him, but the man was far stronger. Then Kara was there, moving with a speed and power that took everyone by surprise. She caught the man's wrist, twisted it until he dropped the knife, and then shoved him backward with enough force to send him sprawling in the dirt. The other two men reached for their weapons, but Kara had already retrieved a heavy walking stick from the cart. She held it with obvious competence, her stance that of someone trained in fighting. "We do not want trouble," she said, her voice hard. "But if you insist on providing it, I will respond in kind." The scarred man climbed to his feet, rage contorting his features. "You will pay for that, orc." "I think not," came a new voice. Simon turned to see an older man had emerged from the trading post, a crossbow held casually in his hands. "I saw what happened. You three attacked first. Now leave before I decide to involve the local militia." The scarred man looked like he wanted to argue, but faced with a crossbow, he apparently decided discretion was the better part of valor. He and his companions backed away, shooting murderous glares at both Simon and Kara. When they were gone, the older man lowered his crossbow and approached. "You two should move on quickly," he said. "Those men are local toughs, and they will likely come back with friends once they have had time to nurse their wounded pride." "Thank you for your help," Simon said sincerely. "We will leave immediately." They abandoned the supplies Simon had purchased and got back on the road as quickly as possible. Once they were several miles from the trading post, Simon finally allowed himself to breathe again. He looked over at Kara, seeing her in a new light. "Where did you learn to fight like that?" he asked. Kara looked uncomfortable. "All orcs learn to fight. It is part of our upbringing. I am sorry if I frightened you." "You did not frighten me," Simon said. "You saved me. I am grateful. I simply did not realize you had such skills." "I do not like violence," Kara said quietly. "But I will use it to protect those I love." They traveled in silence for a while after that, but it was a comfortable silence. Simon found himself thinking about what he had witnessed. Kara was not helpless, as he had perhaps unconsciously assumed. She was strong and capable, able to defend both herself and him if necessary. The realization was oddly comforting. As the days turned into weeks, they fell into a comfortable rhythm. They traveled during the day, keeping to smaller roads and avoiding areas where they might encounter hostility. At night, they would make camp and cook dinner together. And when full darkness fell, they would lie side by side and count stars, continuing their project of mapping the night sky. Simon found that Kara had been right. The stars were largely the same no matter where they traveled, though their positions in the sky shifted slightly. But being able to continue their shared project gave them a sense of continuity, a thread connecting their new life to the one they had left behind. They also talked, long conversations that stretched into the night and covered every imaginable topic. Simon learned more about orc culture, about the complex clan structures, and the honor codes that governed their society. Kara learned about human history, about the rise and fall of kingdoms and the intricate politics that shaped their world. But more than knowledge, they shared their hearts. Simon told Kara about his fear of inadequacy, of never being good enough or interesting enough to hold someone's attention. Kara confessed her terror of rejection, of being seen as nothing more than a monster. They shared their hopes and dreams, their regrets and fears, building an intimacy that went far beyond the physical, though there was physical intimacy too. Slowly, carefully, they explored this new dimension of their relationship. Kara was initially hesitant, worried that her strength might accidentally harm Simon. But Simon was patient, and they learned each other gradually, discovering what brought pleasure and comfort. One night, as they lay wrapped in each other's arms beneath a canopy of stars, Kara said, "I never thought I could be this happy. After my mother died and my father cast me out, I thought my life was over. I thought I would spend whatever years I had left alone and unwanted." "You will never be alone again," Simon promised, "and you are very much wanted." "I want you too," Kara whispered. "More than I ever knew it was possible to want another person. You are my home now, Simon. Wherever we are, as long as we are together, I am home." Simon kissed her tenderly, tasting salt from the tears that streaked both their faces. "Then we will build a home together, somewhere we can be ourselves without fear or judgment." They continued south, and as they traveled, they noticed the attitudes beginning to shift. The further they went from the northern territories, the less pronounced the prejudice against orcs seemed to be. They still encountered suspicion and occasional hostility, but it was tempered by a more cosmopolitan outlook. Here, orcs and humans had more contact, more trade relationships, and therefore more reason to see each other as individuals rather than faceless enemies. In a coastal town called Seabrook, they finally found what they were looking for. The town was bustling and diverse, home to humans, orcs, and even a few elves who had sailed in from distant lands. Interspecies relationships, while not common, were not unheard of. When Simon inquired about purchasing property, the agent barely blinked at the fact that his partner was an orc. They found a small cottage on the outskirts of town, positioned on a hill that offered a spectacular view of the sea. More importantly, from its roof, they had an unobstructed view of the night sky. Simon knew immediately that this was the place. The cottage needed work, but they threw themselves into the task with enthusiasm. Simon set up his workshop in the largest room, hanging his tools and organizing his supplies with the meticulous care of a master craftsman. Kara transformed the rest of the space into a home, bringing warmth and comfort to rooms that had long stood empty. Within weeks, Simon had established himself as the town's clockmaker. His reputation for precision and quality work spread quickly, and soon he had more commissions than he could handle. Kara found work as well, using her strength to help with various labor-intensive tasks around the town. She also began teaching self-defense to women who wanted to learn how to protect themselves, sharing the skills she had learned as part of her orc upbringing. But the best part of their new life was the evenings. As the sun set and darkness claimed the sky, Simon and Kara would climb to the roof of their cottage and continue their great project. Section by section, they counted the stars, filling journal after journal with their careful tallies. On a cool autumn evening, nearly 6 months after their arrival in Seabrook, they completed the count of the 12th and final section. Simon did the math, adding up all the numbers they had painstakingly recorded over the course of more than a year. When he reached the final total, he looked up at Kara with wonder. 4,263 stars, he announced. "Give or take a few we may have missed or counted twice." Kara smiled, her tusks catching the starlight. 4,263 souls watching over us. That is a lot of protection. "It is," Simon agreed. He set aside the journal and took Kara's hands in his. "I have been thinking. We have counted all the stars we can see from this roof. We have mapped the entire visible sky. Our project is complete. It is, Kara said, though she sounded almost sad. What will we do now? I thought we might start a different project, Simon said. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. A lifelong project if you are willing. Kara's eyes widened as she realized what he was holding. Simon opened the box to reveal a ring he had crafted himself, its band made from intertwined gold and silver to represent their two peoples coming together. Set into it was a small diamond that sparkled like a captured star. Kara, Simon said, his voice thick with emotion, you asked me once why I would risk everything for you. The answer is simple. Because loving you is the most natural thing I have ever done. You are my companion, my partner, my home. Will you marry me? Kara made a sound that was half sob, half laugh. Yes, she said, her voice choked with tears. Yes, 1,000 times yes. Simon slipped the ring onto her finger and then they were kissing, holding each other as though they would never let go. When they finally pulled apart, both were crying and laughing at the same time. I never thought this would be possible, Kara said. A human and an orc married. My clan would disown me all over again. The village where you lived would exile you twice over. Then it is fortunate we are here, where people are more interested in living their own lives than policing others, Simon said. We will build our own family, our own traditions. We will show the world that love transcends the old divisions. They were married a month later in a simple ceremony attended by the friends they had made in Seabrook. The local priest, a progressive man who believed in the equality of all sapient beings, performed the service without hesitation. Kara wore a dress of deep green that complemented her skin tone, and Simon wore his finest suit. When the priest pronounced them husband and wife, the small gathering erupted in genuine applause. At the reception afterward, as they danced together under the stars, Kara said, "Do you remember the night we met, when I was sitting on your roof counting stars alone?" "I remember," Simon said. "I thought you were the strangest thing I had ever encountered." "And now?" Kara asked with a smile. "Now I think you are the best thing that ever happened to me," Simon replied. "You brought magic back into my life. You reminded me that there is more to existence than gears and springs, that wonder and beauty are worth pursuing." "You gave me a home when I had none," Kara said. "You showed me kindness when the world had shown me only cruelty. You loved me when I thought I was unlovable." They held each other close, swaying to the music. Above them, 4,263 stars shone down, silent witnesses to a love that had overcome every obstacle. As the months turned into years, Simon and Kara built a life that exceeded their wildest dreams. Their cottage on the hill became a gathering place for other mixed couples, those who had faced similar challenges and prejudices. Simon and Kara offered support and friendship, helping others find the courage to love despite society's disapproval. Simon's clockmaking business continued to thrive. He became known not just for the quality of his timepieces, but for the artistry he brought to each creation. Every clock he made included a small engraving on the back, a simple image of two figures standing beneath a sky full of stars. It was his signature, a quiet celebration of the night he had found Kara counting stars on his roof. Kara's self-defense school grew as well. She trained dozens of women, both human and orc, teaching them not just how to fight but how to carry themselves with confidence and dignity. Many of her students became like family, and the bonds formed in her training sessions lasted lifetimes. But the most unexpected development came 3 years after their wedding. Kara discovered she was pregnant, something they had been told was unlikely given the differences between human and orc physiology. The pregnancy was difficult, requiring careful monitoring by healers from both cultures. But when their daughter was born, healthy and strong with her mother's green skin and her father's brown eyes. They named her Stella, after the stars that had brought them together. Stella grew up in a home filled with love and learning. Simon taught her the intricacies of clockwork, while Kara taught her the traditions of orc culture. She learned to count stars with her parents on the cottage roof, continuing the project that had become a family tradition. By the time she was 10, Stella could identify every constellation visible from their home and had begun calculating the distances to various celestial objects using mathematics her father taught her. 2 more children followed, a son named Calum and another daughter named Nova. The cottage on the hill rang with laughter and life, a testament to what was possible when love was allowed to flourish without constraint. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Simon and Kara climbed to the roof of their cottage alone, having sent the children to stay with friends for the evening. They settled into the same positions they had occupied a decade earlier, though now with more comfortable cushions and the ease of long familiarity. "You ever regret it?" Kara asked. "Giving up your old life for me?" Simon looked at her in surprise. "Never, not for a single moment. Do you?" "Never," Kara echoed. "But I sometimes wonder what would have happened if you had not climbed onto your roof that night. What if you had simply ignored me and gone back to sleep? Then I would have missed out on the greatest adventure of my life," Simon said. He took her hand, his thumb tracing the ring she still wore. "I used to think adventure meant traveling to distant lands or having grand experiences. But I learned that adventure is really about opening yourself to the unexpected, about having the courage to embrace something new even when it frightens you." "You were never frightened of me," Kara said with certainty. "No," Simon agreed, "but I was frightened of what loving you might mean. I was frightened of the prejudice, the danger, the possibility of loss, and yet I found the courage anyway. We both did." Kara leaned her head on his shoulder and they sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars slowly wheel overhead. Somewhere below, they could hear the distant sound of the sea and the muffled noises of the town settling in for the night. "I still count them sometimes," Kara confessed. "The stars. When I cannot sleep or when I am worried about something, I count them like I used to. It brings me peace." "I know," Simon said. "I hear you sometimes, whispering the numbers, and it brings me peace too, knowing you are there." They sat on the roof for hours, pointing out constellations and planets, discussing which star might be Kara's mother watching over them. As midnight approached, Simon said, "I have something for you, an anniversary present." He produced a small wrapped package from his pocket and handed it to Kara. She unwrapped it carefully to find a leather-bound book, its cover embossed with silver stars. When she opened it, she gasped. Inside were all the journals they had filled over the years, their careful star counts and observations, but transcribed and organized into a single beautiful volume. Simon had spent months on the project in secret, creating an heirloom that would last generations. "Our story," Kara whispered, her fingers tracing the pages. "You made our story into something permanent. So our children and grandchildren will know how it all began," Simon said. "So they will know that their parents were brave enough to love despite the world telling them not to." Kara set the book aside carefully and turned to Simon, cupping his face in her strong hands. "I love you," she said fiercely. "I will love you until every star in that sky burns out and the universe goes dark. And I will love you beyond that," Simon replied, "into whatever comes after." They kissed as they had 1,000 times before, and as they had 10,000 times since, each kiss a reaffirmation of the choice they had made on a roof beneath an infinity of stars. As the years continued to pass, Simon and Kara grew old together. Simon's hands, once so steady with clockwork mechanisms, began to shake with age. Kara's strength, while still formidable, was not what it had once been. But they faced aging as they had faced everything else together and with grace. They watched their children grow into remarkable adults. Stella became a scholar, studying astronomy and mathematics at a prestigious university. Calum followed his father into clockmaking, showing an aptitude that suggested he might one day surpass his teacher. Nova became a healer, combining human and orc medical knowledge to create treatments that benefited both peoples. And as their children had children, as the family grew and expanded in ways Simon and Kara had never imagined, the cottage on the hill remained a gathering place. Every summer, the extended family would converge for a week of celebration. And every night during that week, whoever wished would climb to the roof and count stars together, continuing the tradition that had started it all. On a cool spring evening in their 45th year of marriage, Simon and Kara once again found themselves alone on the roof. Both were in their 70s now, their bodies worn by time but their love as strong as ever. They sat wrapped in blankets against the chill, sipping warm tea and watching the familiar constellations appear. "You remember what you told me that first night?" Kara asked. "When I said I was trying to count all the stars." "I said there were probably more stars than anyone could count in a single night," Simon recalled. "Perhaps more than exist in all the numbers we know." "You were right," Kara said. "We spent a year counting and only mapped a tiny fraction of what is out there. The universe is so much bigger than we can comprehend. And yet we tried anyway," Simon said. "That is the important part. We dared to attempt the impossible." Kara smiled, her tusks now lined with age, "like loving across the divide between our peoples." "Exactly like that," Simon agreed. "Everyone said it was impossible, that we would fail, that the world would destroy us. But we proved them wrong, not because we were special or chosen, but because we were stubborn and refused to give up." "The best kind of stubbornness," Kara said. She reached over and took Simon's hand, their fingers intertwining with the ease of long practice. "I would do it all again, you know. Every hardship, every challenge, every moment of fear and uncertainty. I would do it all again for the chance to love you." "As would I," Simon said softly. "You are the star by which I navigate, Kara. Without you, I would be lost." They sat in silence for a while, content simply to be together. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, the same stars that had watched over humanity and orcs and all the peoples of the world since the beginning of time. And somewhere among those countless lights, perhaps, were the souls of those who had loved and lost and lived and died, all watching over those still struggling in the world below. As the night deepened and the temperature dropped further, they reluctantly prepared to climb down from the roof. But before they descended, Kara said, "Simon, thank you." "For what?" Simon asked. "For seeing me that first night, for not turning away, for choosing love over fear, for building this life with me, for everything." Simon felt his eyes grow wet. "Thank you for sitting on my roof counting stars. Thank you for being brave enough to stay when I invited you in. Thank you for loving me back." They kissed once more beneath the stars, two old lovers who had defied the world and won. Then they carefully made their way back down to the warmth of their cottage, where the clock Simon had spent a lifetime building marked the precious hours they had left. Years later, long after both Simon and Kara had passed peacefully in their sleep within days of each other, their descendants would gather on the roof of the cottage on the hill. They would bring the leather-bound book Simon had created, now worn and precious with age, and they would read the story of how a clockmaker and an orc girl had found each other beneath an infinity of stars. And they would count, as their ancestors had counted, marking each light in the darkness, celebrating the beauty of the universe and the courage of those who dare to love despite all obstacles. The tradition would continue for generations, a living testament to two people who had proven that the boundaries between peoples are not as fixed as we believe, that compassion and courage can overcome even the deepest prejudices. The cottage on the hill still stands today, carefully maintained by the family. Inside, among the many clocks that still tick away the hours, hangs a painting commissioned by Stella in her parents' later years. It shows a man and an orc woman sitting side by side on a rooftop, their faces turned toward a sky full of stars. The man holds a journal and a pen, carefully noting numbers. The woman points upward, counting aloud, her expression one of determined joy. Below the painting, in a place of honor, sits the leather-bound book containing their story. And on clear nights, if you listen carefully from the street below, you might hear soft voices from the roof, continuing the count that Simon and Kara began so many years ago. 4,263 stars visible from that particular roof on that particular hillside. 4,263 souls watching over the world. And two more added to their number, two more lights in the darkness, two more witnesses to the power of love to transform both individuals and the world around them. This is how it ended and how it began. With stars counted and love found, with courage chosen and fear overcome, with two hearts from different worlds beating as one beneath a canopy of infinite light. And in the end, that is all any story truly needs: love, courage, and the stubborn refusal to accept the world's limitations. The clockmaker found the orc girl on his roof counting stars alone every single night, and in finding her, he found himself. Together, they counted not just stars but moments and memories, building a life from the infinite possibilities that bloom when we dare to open our hearts to the unexpected. And they lived, as all the best stories promise, happily ever after.